This is the first of 5 videos that we're going to do, each one of which is going to be focused on 1 week of the course, and we're going to be looking at the comments that you've made, and in particular the questions that you've raised, and the ones in order of how many of you have liked those particular questions. The other thing we're going to address are the quiz question, or is the quiz question of each week that you found the hardest. And we'll look at that question, and Simon will explore the answer in a little bit more detail. So remember, we're in week 1, and the first thing to say is that behind us, so the image that's been superimposed is the Capo due Rame, which is the confluence, I suppose, of the Fiumicino Canal and the Tiber. So turning to you,
Sure.
if we're virtually here, why is this place so important?
Well, it's actually very, very important for a number of reasons. First of all, it is, as you rightly say, it's the Fiumicino Canal, or what as archaeologists we call the Fossa Traiana. And this was a canal originally dug by Claudius when he was establishing the fort in the mid-1st century AD. And it runs from the Tiber through to the Tyrrhenian Sea, and effectively helps create the island of the Isola Sacra, which at the south end of which we found Ostia. So the Capo di Rame is the key point where the Fossa Traiana and the Tiber meet, and so it is crucially important to the movement of traffic between Portis and Rome. Primarily, I personally think, the traffic of large river barges carrying marble from the Statio Marmorum, which is the marble yard, which, as you know, is on the north side of the Isola Sacra, and carrying all that marble up to Rome so it could be used in building temples and so forth and so on. But also, I think, traffic coming down from Rome and coming along the canal and then going up the Canale Trasverso to go into the heart of the Portis system. So you have to imagine that there's traffic going up and down the Tiber, traffic coming along the Fossa Traiana, and that point, the Capo di Rame, must have been really a hive of activity, and the port authorities must have really worked very hard to ensure that there were no collisions, there weren't hold-ups, and that everything worked according to plan.
Amazing, brilliant. Okay, so I feel like I'm there already.
Good.
Okay, so we'll start off, as I said, by addressing the question that you found hardest in week 1, and that was, if I can work out my magic technology, which of the following was not an important characteristic of an archaeological find as far as antiquarian researchers was concerned? And the answer was that where the find was located didn't really seem to be of much interest to the antiquarians. So why was that, and also why is that a bad thing in terms of archaeological practice?
Well, it's a complex question actually, and I think we have to be fair to the antiquarians. In the 17th, 18th and 19th century, times when we know that they were visiting Portis and they were taking things away, they were kind of interested in sculptures and inscriptions and things of that kind because they were works of art, and where they came from, in a sense, was less important. So you can't blame them for not thinking that context was important. However, it does actually make it very difficult for us because, of course, we realise as archaeologists that our whole business focuses around writing the story of the past through the material remains. So to do that, we have to know where an inscription, a piece of pottery or a sculpture or a coin comes from, because that's part of the material record which we interpret in the context of the building where it was lost, destroyed or whatever. So although it represents, it's difficult for us, and it means that quite a lot of the early material from Portis, indeed some of the famous sculptures in the Torlonia collection, have no context, a very poor one. They still have they have a lot of interest to us, but it's a, as I say, it's a complex problem.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Okay, so now moving on to the questions that you've raised in descending order of how many times you liked them. So the first one, fabulous one. Is there evidence of habitation on the site before Portis was developed by Claudius. So was there a fishing port here or a natural harbour? What was here before?
I think the answer is actually quite simple. That there's very, very little. At one level, it's hard to be absolutely sure because, of course, Portis is so big. The structures that survive are so massive. Building of them would have obliterated anything that would have been there anyway. But in those sondages that we've made, where we have gone down a long way, there is no what we call residual material. In other words, no material that predates Portis coming up as in later deposits. So it's very, very unlikely. The other point to make is that Portis, I think, was built where it was by the Emperor Claudius in the mid-1st century AD, primarily because there was nothing else there.
Right.
And I think essentially it was a piece of land of relatively low value because it's an estuarine environment at the very north end of the territory of Ostia, and it was sort of the emperor had to appropriate the land to buy to build a port. He wouldn't have bought it, and so in appropriating it, the fact that there wasn't anything there before meant there was less of a conflict. So I don't think there was, in short.
Okay.
Sorry, but I would add, having said that our survey around Portis, further to the east towards Pontigaleria, has picked up a few sherds of pottery of the 5th and 4th and 3rd centuries BC, and indeed the Via Campana, the road which runs from an area further to the east, away from Portis, again towards Pontigaleria, dates to 3rd, 2nd century BC, and so and that was used for transporting salt to Rome. So there was activity in the general area, but no, I repeat again, no major fixed central habitation fishing village that we know of.
Okay, so this bit is an impossible follow-up to answer maybe, but
Okay.
I mean, I'm going to ask it anyway. So was the construction of the hexagon almost certainly will have destroyed all evidence that we could have accessed anyway of the heart of that location of that part of the coast.
Yeah, invariably.
Yeah.
Invariably.
So and the coring work that's been done doesn't reveal anything additional there.
No, well the cores wouldn't, because of course they're about 10 centimetres wide. They go down 10 metres, and you find odd bits of pottery in them. Very little early material, and it's pretty well meaningless. However, having said that, our geophysical survey that we published in 2005 shows that over the whole of the Portis area, you can actually see the lines of the early shorelines, and we see it to the south of Portis, we see them to the east of Portis, and a little bit to the north. So we can imagine that the construction of Portis basically has ripped out all of those earlier shorelines with whatever feeble activity there may have been there before. But again, I repeat, there's no real evidence, as far as I'm aware, that there was anything of any sort at all before the port.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you.
I hope that helps.
No, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Good.
Okay, so did the Claudian period of building at Portis act in some way as a kind of a prototype? Was it a model that was then applied elsewhere in the empire?
No, I think is the simple answer. I think we have to imagine that what I've labelled loosely as the port system of Imperial Rome, which consists of Ostia, Portis, the road system, the canal system, and links up to Civitavecchia and so on, was pretty well unique in the Roman world. It was a development brought about by the emperors to serve the very, very exceptional needs of the city. So the system itself was one developed over time by the emperors. But in terms of Portis itself as a port, I think that I don't think there's really very much evidence for any sort of port like that being built across the Western Med or the Eastern Med. The evidence that we have tends to suggest that ports in the provinces tend to be on a smaller scale. Portis is exceptional in terms of scale. There are some indications that places like Carthage may have undertaken a restructuring of what's the so-called rectangular harbour to make it polygonal, but we don't have the full understanding of that. There is also some evidence that other ports had canals and so on, but I think it would be wrong to say that it was imitated as a port. On the other hand, the reverse is quite possibly true, that the form of the port, with a big outer harbour and a smaller, in our case, hexagonal inner harbour, is an arrangement which actually has its nearest parallels in the great Hellenistic harbours of the East Mediterranean, and one thinks of places like Apollonia, for example, in what's now Libya, Cyrenaica. And in that context, the inner harbours tended to be harbours where there were warships, and the outer harbour was kind of the places where other ships would anchor and so forth and so on. So it's complicated.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. So another personal favourite. What on earth is a mole, Simon?
A mole. Yes, well, different ways of looking at that,
Yes.
of course.
Tell me in specific, what's the Claudian mole?
The Claudian mole is basically a whopping great concrete quay, which extends out. There are two of them, and both of them extend out into the Tyrrhenian Sea and enclose, as you know, something in the region of 200 hectares of water.
Okay, brilliant.
Right.
We know what the mole is now.
Yeah.
Okay. So the Portico de Claudio, obviously one
Yeah.
of the focal buildings discussed in week 1. Did it have to be excavated, or has it always, or do you think it's always been exposed to some extent? And is the ground level that we will see the same as the original ground level?
Start with the second part of the question. The current ground level is pretty well the original ground level. We're talking about centimetres of difference, so that's easy. The other part of the question, I think the simple answer is that it was originally buried, but it has been cleared. My understanding is it was kind of cleared around the earlier part of the very early part of the 20th century.
Right.
It was part of an attempt to free up certain areas of the port as archaeologists like Lully and Calcer and others were starting to explore Portis for the first time, and just like us, were being overwhelmed by the sheer scale of it.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so now, because I'm aware we're running out of time, so we're going to play rapid fire question time.
Rapid fire, okay.
Okay, so the first one, a fabulous one. Having done all the geophysics, how do we then decide where to dig, and then the strategy that would develop from that?
Okay, in our case, well, what we did was do geophysics over the whole site, identify some of the principal buildings, or get a better understanding of them. I then decided to develop research questions about the development of the port through time, and the only place where this would be work properly would be in the centre of the port, where the key administrative buildings are. So that's why we chose to dig there, and the geophysics then allowed us to home in on particular details of plans that we didn't understand, that we felt would help us understand the function of buildings better and how they develop through time.
Brill.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Simon. So that's a wrap up for the week 1 video, and we'll be back again tomorrow with the week 2 roundup. Thanks a lot.